Today's gospel is difficult. It's all about a lesson on marriage and divorce, and it contains something to disturb just about everybody. God's ideal prescription for how to treat each other in the most sacred of relationships on earth clearly reveals how often we fail in that endeavor. We fail to live up to the standards that Jesus articulates according to Mark. The latest statistics suggest that we are rapidly approaching that point statistically when 1 in every 2 marriages fails. The gospel calls us to live as kingdom people. Kingdom people. But our failed marriage rate suggests we are in some other kind of kingdom than the one Jesus had in mind that He wants us to live in. A popular joke is going around that kind of lightens the tone for the gospel for this morning. It seems that a couple on their way to the justice of the peace to be married has a head-on collision and both are killed. They find themselves, instead of at the magistrate's office, at the gates of heaven, waiting for St. Peter to complete the paperwork to get them in. They talk about the fact that they missed the appointment with the one who was to marry them. They're somewhat sad over that, but after all, they're at the gates of heaven. Prospective groom says to his prospective bride, "I wonder if we can get married in heaven." When Peter finally completes the paperwork and lets them in, they ask him, "Can we get married up here?" And Peter says, "I don't know. Nobody's ever asked before. But I'll find out." He leaves them sitting there discussing their future in heaven. The bride-to-be says to the groom, "It would be nice to be married here. All sorts of good living arrangements. Be a wonderful life." The more they talk about it, time goes by, and finally the bride-to-be says, "What if it doesn't work out?" And they discuss that possibility. Eternity, you know, is a long time. And they begin to think of that, married for all eternity. And she says, "If it doesn't work out, I wonder if we can get a divorce." After several months, St. Peter returns, somewhat exasperated. And sure enough, they say to him, "St. Peter, if we get married in heaven and it doesn't work out, can we get divorced in heaven?" And St. Peter slams his notebook to the ground, stomps his foot red in the face. And he said, "What's wrong?" He said, "It took me 3 months to find a priest up here to marry you. Think how long it would take to find a lawyer to divorce you." In the gospel for this morning, Jesus is accosted by the Pharisees, those self-appointed guardians of the religious law, and they ask him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" Now you have to understand that this confrontation is in a particular context. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. His reputation has preceded him. He is known both as a budding rabbi, a teacher of the law. He cures the sick. He has fed a huge crowd of people, estimates now up to 5,000. And there are many who are saying that he is their longed-for Messiah, the one to come to restore Israel to its greatness among the nations of the world. And so it is that they challenge him. They don't want him to succeed because they are the guardians and interpreters of the law. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? They know full well that John the Baptist was put to death by the governor because John criticized the governor's divorce and remarriage to his sister-in-law. So if they can get Jesus to speak on record, then maybe the governor will take care of him too. They're well aware that Herod has that capability. He proved it with John, and he could do it to Jesus. So the encounter between the Pharisees and Jesus with the issue about marriage and divorce is as much a political and intrigue question as it is a religious one. They want to find some way to get rid of this man. So it is that he asks them, turns the tables on them. He says, what does your law of Moses say about this? And they respond that the law of Moses provided that a husband could divorce his wife simply by giving her a certificate saying that he was divorcing her. If she had that certificate, she could be free to remarry. If she didn't, and she took up with someone else, she would be labeled an adulteress. You have to understand that in this time in Israel, women and children had no rights. There was no protection for them other than the generosity of the person to whom the woman was married. The Mosaic law allowed a man to divorce his wife, but it didn't say anything about a wife divorcing her husband. Jesus knew all this. That in effect women and children were property. If the woman did remarry without that certificate of divorce, she could not worship in the synagogue. She could not associate with women who were acceptable, legally married, and the children would all be outcast. It's interesting that reading this gospel this particular week, see all the demonstrations that were recorded on television of women lawfully seeking their own rights. The issues about the place of men and women in society is still being debated. But the confrontation between Jesus and these Pharisees is as much a political issue as it is a religious issue. So it is, he turns the tables on them. He said the reason that clause is in the Mosaic law permitting a man to divorce his wife is because you're hard-hearted. You're hard-hearted. Hard-hearted. And it's not an issue about law. It's an issue about love. And then he recites for them the opening chapters of Genesis, stating that God created them male and female. The intention was that they were lived together forever. Everything would be provided for them. That this was a relationship of the heart and not of the law. These are radical teachings, it seems to me, particularly in our own day and age where the divorce rate is climbing to near 50%. Radical teachings. The prayer book calls marriage a sacrament. A sacrament. Remember the definition from the prayer book of a sacrament: an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. That's the definition of what Jesus considers marriage to be about. And so it is that we gather here this morning to hear that standard that he lays out for them, that it's a matter of the heart and not of the law. I dare say that maybe as many as half of us know something about what divorce can bring. The pain and the anguish, not only to the two individuals involved, but the pain and experience by the rest of the family members. I would be the first to say that I can speak of that pain and that destructive anger. It has touched my own family more than once. And because of that, and because of this teaching, I too have struggled with the whole issue about marriage and divorce. There was a time earlier in my ministry, and I did a lot of weddings. When you're the rector of a large parish, they seem to come every spring in droves. There was a time when to be remarried in the Episcopal Church, there was a whole process to go through that has been revised many times. But I've tried to take seriously Jesus' instruction that this is not about law, it's about love. And it's really about a sacrament. So in recent years, what I have done when I am approached by a couple who want to be remarried in the church, I ask them to please go and have a civil ceremony. And then come and we will bless, in the context of the community of faith, that civil arrangement. Keep the two straight, the difference between law and love. And we are about love. I find it hard to believe that we still confuse those two. I also know the struggle where it is much easier to deal with law than it is with love. That is what we are called to. The gospel is disturbing. It's always been disturbing. One writer has pointed out that marriage is like a parish. It's about sinful folk learning to live together, to care for one another. And when they sit down to the dinner table, the third at the table is the Lord, just as we gather here at this place, around this table. Sinful, forgiving, hopefully loving people. And out of God's generosity to be forgiven and fed. I like that vision a lot better than arguing about what the law demands.